Hello, everybody. My name is Filippo Lorenzin, and I am the presenter of this panel discussion about digital art produced by electric artifacts. Today, we will talk about surrealism and alternative digital worlds. Before starting, I'd like to give you an idea of how the event will be structured. First, I will ask questions that draw out some of the high-level themes regarding surrealist themes in digital art and how contemporary technology influences the way creatives generate new otherworldly universes. Finally, I will give you, the public, the opportunity to ask specific questions that you have been thinking about. But before we dive into the discussion, I would like to introduce my guest. She is a digital artist and designer known for her vivid and recognizable artwork and videos. Her fluid, shimmering, and colorful visuals traverse from the club to the gallery space, music videos, and live VJ sets, whilst also gracing the covers of many digital and vinyl music releases. She once stated that the scale of her work could be that of a nebula or galaxy, or as tiny as a cell or atom. Please welcome Rachel Noble. Thanks, Rachel, for joining us today.
Hi, thank you.
Thank you. Our second guest is an artist who works with mixed media photography and video. Her works often explore the concept of digital escapism through organic and sensorial aesthetics as H2O and futuristic ecosystems. Her project, Ikebana, a custom series of virtual escapism into flora, surrealism, and ecofuturism, is featured now on Electric Artefacts. Please welcome Irene P. Tello. Hi, Irene. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi.
Hi. Our third guest is an assistant professor of art history at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, where she teaches courses on modern and contemporary art and comparative media studies. Her research interests concern contemporary art, media, space, and place. She has published previously in Moving Image Review and Art Journal, Public Art Dialogue, Millennium Film Journal, Mediopolis, and other venues. Please welcome Dr. Annie Dell'Aria. Thanks, Annie, for joining us today.
Hello.
Hi, thank you. Our final guest is the co-founder of Electric Artefacts, an online venue bringing together curators, artists, and organizations dedicated to digital art to host exhibitions and connect with patrons. She specializes in introducing digital solutions and new business models in the arts industry. She also leads cultural partnerships at .art, the digital address for the arts community, and was part of its core launch team in 2016. As part of .art's development, she led a variety of digital initiatives, including Rhizom's 9th edition of 707.art. .art's participation at the inaugural CADAF online, and most recently oversaw the launch of Ars Electronica.art Global Gallery. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Aleksandra Artamonovskaja. Thanks, Alex, for joining us today. Alex, would you like to introduce Electric Artefacts to the public before starting with the questions?
That sounds pretty well. As you rightfully pointed out, Electric Artefacts is the online venue for new media art, and we serve as an exhibition space and a destination for learning, as well as a consultancy on everything at the intersection of digital technology and contemporary art. So through our exhibitions and editorials and advisory services, we aim to be the point of reference on this rapidly evolving field. The context within which Irene and Rachel are exhibiting is our inaugural show, which launched in September, and now we're approaching its final weeks, so don't miss a chance to check it out after the talk. And it was a result of an international collaboration between a UK-based nonprofit Lumen Prize, a Spanish gallery on Chaos, and a curator from US, Tanner Milliken. Together, we curated and paired 18 emerging and established artists across 8 different countries. And each of their works span a multiplicity of mediums, including artificial intelligence, CGI, 3D, as well as moving image works. All of them are editions or unique, which can also be purchased. So I'm excited that today we get a chance to talk in more detail with Rachel and Irene as our exhibiting artists for the show.
So do I. Thank you, Alex. I would like to start with Rachel first. Rachel, the works you presented on electric artifacts feature abstract shapes that look like they could be found both in deep space and under the lens of a microscope. Can you tell us something about the creative process behind this project? I'm particularly interested in the fact that you started with hand-drawn sketches.
Drawing I think was something that that's like kind of what I started with in my practice. So I think kind of like returning to that as a starting point felt really like natural and like organic, and working sort of on a computer every day, like I work in design, I kind of wanted to just reset the button a little bit and just have that more like tactual, like direct just expression to like start it off. And it's like something that I just do naturally without much effort. I kind of, like draw on my shopping lists and things like that. So I thought it might be interesting to see what would happen if I translate some of these sketches or drawings into this digital space that I've sort of been immersed in for, a few years now. And I just kind of wanted just to see what it would look like. So with these pieces of work, that was probably what that process was. It was kind of like an experiment, which a lot of my works are kind of like my personal artwork is sort of, I just want to see what something is going to look like. So
it's very experimental.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
But I think also just having like a break from the computer, just to like get something out that was a bit more intuitive and a bit more have a bit more control over it, and then translating that into the digital space, that's definitely was important.
Yeah, oh, that's great. Thank you. Irene, the role played by plants in your project is often central. Your series featured on electric artifacts shows a balanced ecosystem where nature and hyper-artificiality coexist pacifically. Can you tell us what inspired you to work on this project?
Well, first of all, hi to everyone that is here listening. I think I said before, but yeah, hi everyone again. In my case, everything is started in 4 years ago, approximately, when I started a project that was called ORG. And this project was basically like a imitation or representation of nature itself, but just like raising these questions, like how we can represent like nature in a digital medium. And this started like this starting point. But then everything just like started to carry on and to develop to another different side or perspective. And then it happened in this quarantena started like I was just very too inspired to say, I don't know, but everything was very fluent in a way to create. And I was thinking like, oh, how I could like just back to this, to this project, like, but I wanted to experiment also with shapes and colors, a different vision of how nature should be represented. Because normally we don't see nature like with really electric colors, so I wanted something very powerful, like in terms not just like aesthetics, like, but everything very, very powerful in colors, in I don't know, like to just create like a different ecosystem. And I was very diving into this idea of digital ecosystem, but also into flora and also into like digital ecosystem itself. But I wanted to create that like different just aura and sensitive space to say. I don't know, was really, really bizarre experiment, and I'm glad that happened. But also came by the idea of ancient tradition of ikebana. Do you know? Like it's a Japanese tradition that is about ornamentation, to say, of the plants. So it's just like an art. And it's basically like Japanese women doing beautiful nature elements. So everything started with this kind of feeling about this tradition, but not at all, just like a simple input. And I'm really glad of the work done, and yeah.
That's great. That's great. Thank you, Irene. This is a question for both of you. Surrealism artists propose that the interior world of a mind is as complex as the world beyond our bodies. To what degree the use of digital media influences the way we dream? I'd like, again, to know what both of you think. I would like to start with Rachel, if possible.
Yeah.
So to give you an example, just to give you a very simple example, sometimes it happens to me that after surfing the web for the whole day, sometimes it happens that when I sleep, when I dream, I may dream about retweets or stuff, which is more like a nightmare, I suppose. But you know what I mean, like in terms of even how you interact with the world. I suppose that, for example, people living 2 centuries ago had very different dreams from what we have now. So I wonder if to what degree you think the use of digital media affects our modern way to dream, which sounds like a very general and broad question, but
yeah, I wasn't sure if you meant dream as in imagination or literally dream. But I could talk about both. I definitely have dreams which are a lot more vivid now, and a recurring thing that that happens is I'll dream up this really incredibly beautiful like environment or landscape or like natural phenomenon, like some weird like kind of like my work, like alien looking like glass like flowers or like a sunset or like the ocean catching the light in a certain way, and it's like so stunning and beautiful. And then what happens is I'll try to be taking a photograph of it because I'm like, oh, I have to capture this amazing sight, because it's like, it's like how everyone takes pictures of the sunset or something to like show everyone on Instagram or whatever. But then I have this thing where I'm like trying to take a picture of it, and I know that it's like I know I've created this scene in the dream, but I'm still aware that it's like transient, and I'm like trying to take a photograph of it, and I can't. Like something happens where I'm trying to take the photo and I can't push the button, or it's like gets stuck, or it disappears before I'm able to do it. That's a really interesting question though, because I think my work a lot of the time is trying to almost like capture those things that I see, but I don't think that urge to try and take a photograph of it would be there if it wasn't for having like smartphone and that kind of instinct. Now it's almost like become this natural instinct to just get your phone out like capture like literally everything that's just a point of like interest in some way, or spectacle, I guess. But I think that like urge to do that has always been in my work, this kind of like magpie, like, you know, taking like things that are like really like shiny or colorful, and so it's just become a bit more like compounded with technology. So yeah, there's, if you want, yeah, if that's the answer you wanted, we're like literally talking about my dreams, then
it was more, more in terms of, well, I suppose you actually answered my question. So
yeah.
No, definitely yes. And I agree with you. Sometimes it happens to me as well that when I dream, when I sleep, sometimes I'm in front of a beautiful landscape, or, you know, maybe I'm with, I don't know, like a celebrity person or something like that. And I'm like, oh, I wish I could take a picture now because nobody's going to believe me later. But of course, you know, that's how dreams work, I suppose. What do you think, Irene?
Well, about dreams, like I have a lot of dreams every day. No, but yeah, I don't know if everything starts with dreams or all, but in my case, I'm more into dreams than reality, to say. I don't know if this is good or bad, but I guess it's good in this case. Well, I'm also very related to alien, like this kind of alien aesthetics, but it is not something that I dream of. Like, for example, to say like the painter Dali, that he was just putting a spoon in the desk beside, like closer to the bed, and then at 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. just wake up, and then he was just painting the dreams, like just totally crazy. This is not the case, of course. But yeah, you have like visions and just like visual inputs that came to your mind, and then you just go by this side or this side. Also, the technology helps a lot to make it real. Like also what I was talking also in the interview, like this intersection between technology and art, that is very interesting, also in related to also flora and nature, how we represent nature today. But in my case, I also think I'm this kind of person that I'm more into abstract side of things, like more, I always prefer to stay in the surrealism, because it's not just something that I feel like more closer to, but it's just like simple happens, like just come to me. And yeah, and it's very interesting, like the way we edit art is great today, because or what are our influences or our like way to see the world. I think it's just a mix of everything. Like your imagination, of course, takes a really main role, but also depends on the kind of mind that you have. I always believe it that there is two kind of minds. Obviously, like the straight minds, like just like practical minds, to say, and of course the abstraction, more disruptive minds, as I call it. Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
I think that's all. Yeah.
That's brilliant. Thank you. I have another question for both of you. Rachel and Irene, can you please tell us about the way you expect your works to be enjoyed by the public? In other words, how should one approach your works? I would like to start with Irene this time.
Oh, okay. How like people like see my work, or okay. Well, I don't really know. I don't have a clue. Just people say like, I love it, and then I say, okay, I want to know why you love it. but then this is very difficult question. Like no one is really ready to say why they love it, and this is like the tricky part.
Yeah.
People usually say like it's something like very like impressive in the way of composition. I don't know. There is something like not only because colors, but it's like something like more, yeah, like boom. This cult of like, I think I didn't mention it before, but just like the cool objects, like to make cool of like not only Ikebana, but like to ancient, this kind of ancient theories and cult of all objects, like in some kind of religions or cultures or like indigenous groups, they have this kind of cult about some object or some plant or some ritual. So this is also related to like, okay, this is the object, this is the central part, and then it's just to take all your sense and to take your attention. And this is something like very eye-catching. And this is related to but I usually don't really guess like what people could think about my pieces, digital work. One thing that I really want to say, and I wanted to say now that we are in public, yeah, but I wanted to say like people should just start to, in general, start to appreciate more and more and valorating more the digital artist, because digital art is also a profession, is a way to also to make a life. On my case, I'm practically almost living on it. Like I have a lot of projects and proposals, and I'm working with collaborations and with brands, and you know, it's moving, so it's starting and it's going really well. So this kind, I just like to make conscious of people that digital art is not like a free candy store. I wanted to just say in public, because some people think like digital art should be free or it's not for time. I mean, it's our creativity, it's our time, it's our aesthetics, and you know, like it should not be like, yeah.
Absolutely, I agree. I totally agree with you. I think everyone.
Yeah. Like in a sense, like some people, for example, I have some not only friends, but people normally ask you like, oh, they just think like digital art should just be like something like you just borrow or just give or just, and it's like no way. In collaborations and festivals, of course, you have to be up to present your work. I mean, I'm totally defend that. But yeah, you had to also have limits, and you had to know what you're doing. Yeah,
I think that's an interesting thing, you know, the one you just said, because I suppose that's one of the perk, but also one of the tricky things about anything creative, let's say, made online or, you know, made with digital tools. The fact that, you know, it's quite easy to find digital art, isn't it? I mean, more often than not, you don't really have to, you know, I don't know, take the car, go to a place, open a door, meet the gallerist, etc., etc. It's actually, you know, from a certain point of view, that's probably one of the main differences between traditional, you know, I call it traditional, but you know what I'm talking about. So, you know, let's say installations or paintings or sculpture and so on, and digital art. The fact that, you know, it's everywhere, it's always available, but at the same time, that doesn't mean that it's free, I suppose. No, that's definitely something that in the last 10 years has changed a lot. I can say that from my personally, you know, looking at what happened in the last 10, 15 years, you can definitely see a rise of digital artists, a rise of artists working with digital media that, you know, that, how can I say, work with these tools, knowing that those works are not to be available, you know, anywhere and for everyone, if it makes any sense. I think that you can definitely see a difference between what was done, let's say, 10 years ago and what is done now. Not that not that at the time there weren't digital art galleries, but let's say that they were, how can I say, they were way less than now. And, it was more like an experiment, I suppose, when now, because of the kind of year we had, many galleries and many curators and many creatives had to find another way to express themselves, another way to collect art, and so on. So no, that's absolutely true. What do you think, Rachel? How, let's say, when do you make a work? Let's say, do you imagine, I don't know, a sort of ideal public, or you just make it and let's see what happens? If you know what I mean.
No, I never imagine like there's like this ideal person to be looking at my work, because I think the part of what's exciting is I'm putting something out into the world and I don't know how it's going to be responded to, and that's part of why I'd make the work in the first place. It's like developing a language that, it might be something, I do, there's things that I want in terms of like, I want to make things that maybe someone hasn't seen before. So it's like a visual experience. I want to give someone like an experience visually. It's very much to do with how things look and how it might create an emotion or a feeling through like the aesthetics and through what you're looking at. And it's sort of, trying to translate something that I experience visually. I sort of respond to things a lot more extreme, in a more extreme way than I think most people. Like, I notice things and I pick up on things, and it's like the visual stimulus that I experience, I'm sort of maybe trying to like distill that experience I have and present it in a way that expresses something and might communicate something to someone. And I don't know who's going to interpret that. I never know what kind of person's going to respond to it. It's always a surprise, and that's the exciting part of it for me. And
I suppose that's very close to what Irene said about digital art, isn't it? About the fact that if you make, let's say, an installation or a painting or a sculpture, and that's going to be on display, in a contemporary art, in a physical contemporary art gallery, of course you have people that can get in, just by, out of curiosity. But I mean, we know that 95% of the people entering that room will most likely know who you are, or most likely will be, how can I say, curious about contemporary art. When in fact, especially you design also album covers, meaning, that means that your art can be seen could be seen literally by anyone. And
I really love that idea of like my work causing someone to get inspired, and they might be like, oh, like they'll see my work and they'll be like, oh, can you make this for me? And it's just, it's nothing to do with the art world or fine art. It's just that they've seen my work and it looks so weird and like new to them, and they're like, oh, can you make this logo for me? Or can you make, and I think that's really fun too. I like really value those interactions with people. And I just, I love like popular culture as well, and like design, and like I think definitely what you're getting at is like access to the work is something I really enjoy. Like I'm not trying to like protect my work and like keep it away from people, because there's so many other ways you can kind of make a living through being an artist and being creative. And
oh, that's very true.
I definitely agree with what you were saying though before about it's not just a free thing for other people to just take from, but I like the accessibility of it in terms of being on like a digital platform for sure. Yeah,
that's great.
So yeah, I think I cut you off.
That's great. Annie, I have the first question for you. I would like to hear what's your take on how technology shaped the way artists imagined other worlds in the last century. Cultural movements such as Dada and Surrealism 1 century ago were interested in the way machines worked and sometimes thought this set an example for artists looking for original creative processes. Do you see any connection between what's produced now in contemporary digital art and what was explored in the past?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was Marshall McLuhan who said that artists are the first people who figure out how to even use new technologies. So whether it's film or video or digital technology, they explore the expressive potential of it, but also kind of what it can potentially mean. So I think that there's a lot of connections, especially to kind of thinking about what are the affordances of each media. So if you look at film and you look at, you know, surrealist examples of film by Dali, or even a little bit later, Maya Deren, you know, so much of what makes it dreamlike is about the cut. It's this connection between one shot to the next. And then when you move into video, it's this kind of use of electronic fields, electronic worlds like Pipolodi Wrist or even Namjoon Pike. And then, you know, when you go into digital, it's again this kind of ability to produce an immersive world that you can kind of go into in 3 dimensions. And when I watch both of your video work, your moving image work, I've just like struck, there's always this kind of floating perspective that would be impossible or near impossible to do in film or video. So it's like, what can I realize in this medium, right, in order to kind of advance, you know, a dreamlike aesthetic, if we're sticking with this idea of surrealism, that, you know, I couldn't in previous ones. And I think that that's fascinating. Even when I see the 2D work, I imagine being able to rotate around all of those forms in this kind of floating, otherworldly way. So I think that there absolutely is connection. And there's also kind of, you know, another kind of branch of artists exploring technologies where they're kind of like, you know, breaking it down to its, you know, bare essentials. You can see a lot of early video artists doing that. You can even see how digital technology is really influencing other media like painting right now. If you look at someone like Avery Fisher or, you know, Laura Owens. So I think that it spurns off in multiple directions, and it's kind of fascinating for me to kind of, you know, learn about all of the different aspects of this going on at once. And I think that, you know, another kind of central tenet of surrealism, in addition to dream worlds, is like automatism and kind of, you know, exploring kind of random processes where maybe you don't have the actual picture in your head before you sit down. You know, you might have a preparatory drawing, but the end result is totally different. And I think that these technologies allow you to explore that kind of automatic process in a lot of ways, whether it's artificial intelligence or just kind of, you know, allowing different things to kind of mutate and animate as you create. Absolutely.
What you just said reminded me of this media history course I did when I was at the uni. We spent 1 month talking about Marshall McLuhan, about, you know, very quickly. So basically the idea is that whenever a new technology is introduced in a society, according to McLuhan, the role of the artist is to, is to filter, to make it easier for the rest of society by using that new media in a creative and artistic way. So that's why I think, generally speaking, it's so interesting to see contemporary artists using, their contemporary tools, if you know what I'm talking about. That's why maybe I'm a bit not concerned. Let's say I'm a bit, I just feel it a bit awkward when I see artists, contemporary artists that use, they make paintings, but they make paintings like they did maybe 2 centuries ago, if you know what I'm talking about. I think at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter the media you use. What matters is how you are able to translate, let's say, the contemporary way of feeling and thinking in your art, if it makes any sense. But yeah, McLuhan is, of course, one of the most known media theorists. One thing that struck me in recent years is how most of the first net art works produced in the 90s were about language and codes, while now it seems there is a new generation of creatives who don't need to explore the nature of digital media from that specific point of view, and are instead fascinated by the emotions, by the psychological effect of using digital devices and software, basically what we just said. Annie, do you think there has been a shift in terms of interest over the years? So looking at the history of media, so let's say cinema, let's say films, let's say photography, or even painting, I suppose. Do you think it's true that usually the first artists working with a new tool are more interested in, how can I say, in what makes it so special, and then you have a second generation that somehow is, just used to the existence of this tool, and is more thinking about what you can do with it? Does it make any sense?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, especially if you look at like video art, for example, that's very true. If you look at people who first were using video in the late 60s and the 70s, it's kind of very conceptual work that really makes you think about the nature of, electronic instantaneity. It makes you think of like the nature of the medium. And the art world itself was so immersed in questions of medium at that time as well. So it kind of makes sense. And then, you get to the 80s and the 90s, and artists are exploring more narrative or more psychological components of video. And there's exceptions to that in the 70s as well. But generally, we see that happen. I also think that in terms of the more text-based net art to now, a lot of that is also just the development of the technology itself. I remember, when Radiohead's Kid A album came out, and it was the coolest thing that they had these little 30-second animations, but it took you, 5 minutes to download that. So, so just the ability to kind of make things of very high resolution and things that can be, made visible fairly quickly is very different now than it was in the early days of net art, when really, when we went on web pages, we were mostly looking at text.
Absolutely.
Images would take forever to download. So I think that some of it is also just, the development of the delivery of the technology as well.
Absolutely. I remember that when I was 12 or 13, it took almost 24 hours to download 2 songs. So yeah, I definitely remember that time. I'm not that old, but I'm from the countryside. And that's actually quite interesting, because that's what we were talking about earlier when we mentioned how great it is to have the ability to find digital art almost anywhere. I'm thinking about the fact that it's true that more often than not you can find digital art anywhere, but at the same time it's not that accessible, I suppose, just because sometimes there are some projects that demand, a very fast connection, for example, or I don't know, maybe you need, the last model of iPhone, or maybe you need, a virtual reality headset and all of that. And at the end of the day, not that many people have access to it. So yeah, these are all very interesting questions. And of course, it will take 2 months to discuss all of this. But yeah, I mean, I suppose this is the time for the public to shine. Do you have, please public, do you have any questions we can answer? Please feel welcome to write them in the chat. This is the right time to do it. But in the meantime, I just want to thank you all for joining me today. It was very great, especially because I know that how many of us? 5. I have a feeling that there are at least 4 different time zones here. So it's great. So it feels very international. So
I think while we're waiting for any questions, I wanted to quickly follow up on Rachel and Irene's practice. And I know, Rachel, you mentioned in one of your interviews that one of the most challenging things is actually learning and being by yourself, going through that process of learning a new tool. And I'm sure, Irene, you have the same problem. And I wanted to see, when you envision a new piece, do you think that you're limited by your knowledge of what's possible to create with the tool? Or you just, if you envision something, then you just go about figuring out, okay, what do I need to learn to create my next project? And, if the solutions are not there yet, how do you overcome these challenges?
Yeah, I would say both. It's like a kind of dance between what you already know and like learning stuff on the fly to get it to where you want it to be. It depends what I'm trying to do. I mean, often it's like I don't, I learn skills and I sort of progress, and I'm like, for myself, because it's like I'm tired of using the same tools or the same processes, and I want to do something new, so I'll like learn something new because it's more interesting for me. But I don't need to know how to use something like a pro in order to create what I want to create. I can create it like in the moment, like using whatever I have, and there's always a way of expressing what I want to express with the knowledge that I have. So it's like, it's just this like push and pull of like, it's not quite how I want it to be, so I'm gonna go down that like black hole of YouTube tutorials and or just like experimentation. But like generally in my personal work, it's never about like technical skills and knowledge. Like I can use drawing, I can use collage, I can take photos, I know how to kind of manipulate all sorts of different media into expressing what I want to express. It's like it's just feels so much better when you're kind of more in the flow of like you've sort of got to a point where you've learned enough and it's just kind of like a flow. It's like it is like drawing. It is. So I'm using the program and it just comes naturally because I've done it enough. But yeah, it depends because I do design work, and then that's usually where the stress comes from, is trying to meet a client's needs. And because like for me, I know it's kind of what my needs are, and I can hit that regardless of what my skills are. But like other people have this like vision, and you're trying to like they've seen the whole world of like, oh, we want it to look like that and that and that and that, and you're like, well, none of that is what I've made.
Of course, they have to respect your personal vision as well.
Yeah.
The work. Actually, speaking of toolkits, and maybe Irene, you can start, and Rachel also. We have someone from Seattle, Washington, wondering what are your toolkits, or what kind of software do you use to create the works?
Well, I'm supposed to talk. Well, I didn't really understand the question. I'm sorry. Could you repeat?
Of course. What kind of programs have you used, for example, to make the Ikebana series?
Okay. Well, I use different programs. Like I normally use Adobe, but I also use like kind of free softwares if I need to make some. But normally, I work pretty much with Adobe, yeah. And
Adobe, yeah.
yeah. If I need to make like, for example, the pieces of video that I work pretty much with video too. I do like video editions and also with animation. I really like it to animate the scenes and to make the frames and all this kind of universe. I just get lost in it every time I work in a new piece project. And yeah, I'm very also agree with Rachel said that this kind of improvement and also in technique that you used to start with. In my case, I started with very simple and plain colors and very simple lines, and then I just like you just feel the progress. Just start with you just start with different techniques and different like approaches and different ways to I don't know, just shape elements. So I don't know, it's just like fluent and natural process. And yeah, basically this.
And Rachel, were you also working in Adobe for your series?
Well, no, I use Cinema 4D. It's a 3D program. But yeah, I use Adobe a lot as well. But those ones I think I just made in Cinema 4D, and then I use Octane, which is like a renderer, which is like a plugin. It's kind of a separate program. Yeah, I mean, I kind of interchange between like Illustrator and Photoshop because they kind of different processes of like draw. So like, for example, I might make like an outline in Illustrator, which is like a vector, and then I'll import it into a 3D program and then do most of my work in there. But you know, I might make textures or like use photographs even and bring them into the 3D world. And I use After Effects a lot actually for visual work, not just for like moving image. It's quite good for just different effects and like adding highlights, and it's kind of more, I feel like it's a lot more powerful than Photoshop sometimes. But yeah, so I like to use like a big mishmash of stuff, and because I feel like if you get stuck in one program, it sort of starts to look a certain way, and I like using things the wrong way. Like, you know, I'll like do design stuff in like After Effects and you know, so yeah, but
multiplicity.
Sorry?
A multiplicity of tools.
Yeah.
We have one more question. Who should we give this to, Filippo? Maybe let's ask Annie. It's how will the digital art disrupt the traditional art world?
Well, I mean, it's hard. I mean, it's kind of already been happening, I suppose, in terms of just, I mean, if you just look at the dominance of even video in art institutions, especially since digital projection has been, you know, more widely available, it's kind of taking over these, you know, institutional spaces. And, you know, like I mentioned, I mean, ideas about data as well as digital ways of making images have been influencing painting and sculpture in a number of different ways. But then there's this question of access too, right? Of the ability for museums or institutions to open up events, to open up exhibitions to a wider public, is, I think, you know, something that's important, especially if you think about, you know, if you're talking about avant-garde cinema or experimental cinema in like the 60s and the 70s, you're really only going to see those in cities or certain really cool university film clubs. You know, you're not going to really get exposure to that at that same level of being able to watch entire films or entire videos, you know, unless you have that kind of geographic and oftentimes socioeconomic proximity. So I think the access factor is a major one. But also, I mean, people still make paintings and sculptures. I mean, I don't think it's going to be like something that's going to, you know, make certain forms of art go totally away. But I mean, if there's one thing that I think is a constant in art history, it's that there has always been, you know, this interest in adapting to and encouraging new technologies, new ways of making images. And, you know, there's always room for everything. And I think, you know, you can even go back, you know, to, you know, the beginning of printmaking or photography. You know, you can go further back than just the 20th century and see how that happens.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's also worth mentioning, we recently wrote an article about some of the changes that are happening already. And I wouldn't say it's disrupting it in a sense that sort of in an intrusive way, but it's more about companies in general taking best practices of digital artists who've been exhibiting art online for the last couple of decades. And now that everyone else realizes that it's time to be able to show your art online to a wider reach, they're using those practices and integrating it to a part of their traditional programming, whether it's museums or corporations or private collections. I'm going to share it here.
All right. Do we have any other questions?
I think there is one more. So we love how Annie referenced Maya Deren, and as historically women are pioneers in digital art and or video. Do either artists link their work or concepts to cyber feminism? I think that's a question, I guess, to Rachel and Irene.
I don't really know how to answer the question. Yeah, I mean, I would love to say something, but in this case, I don't really know. Like, I don't know, Rachel.
I mean, yeah, I remember watching Maya Deren's films like at art college. I'm not like consciously like placing myself in like cyber feminism. Like there's so much more that like feeds into my work. But you know, I think there's definitely a part of what I do which is giving a voice to something which is a bit more, it is more feminine in terms of what I'm maybe expressing and trying to give space to and put value on a more place where I'm coming from, a more feminine space of making and a sensitivity and a more sensual and a more organic, intuitive process. I feel like what I would say is that maybe the art world and art history and the establishment of art colleges come from maybe a more male history of way of doing things, way of thinking, way of creating, and like just there's so much you can talk about in that, but I'm sure a lot of you kind of know what I'm saying without kind of going into it. But yeah, maybe just I think coming from a place of just expressing something that's more from the internal world, and is that's kind of what where I would place my work in that kind of area. But I don't sort of think of it being cyber under that term, but maybe it sort of has a relationship to that in some way. And like I'm a big fan of like Francesca Woodman's photography, and I think like there was always something in what she was doing with her body and composition, and something just really empowering about taking back a female voice in the art world, and kind of not being scared to express something that's maybe a bit more vulnerable, or like has been disregarded as I don't know, like decorative, or just anything that's maybe been squashed down a bit and, you know, not put on a pedestal in the art world. And
Yeah.
I think that's kind of the connection I'd make in like the way I think about my work and making. And yeah, I never really think about the term, like I think it was cyber feminism, was it the question?
Yeah.
But yeah, that would be.
Yeah, Irene?
Yeah, that I didn't answer before, but I don't really think there is any distinction between, in this case, like feminist or female artwork. In my case, I think like it should be the same between, of course, men's and women artists. And like related to feminism in art, I'm not really into, I mean, of course, I'm into the movement of defend like women into art. But yeah, I think it's totally indifferent, like not that I don't defend like the woman role in art. Of course I do. Actually, I'm a woman also, so yeah, it's not because of this, but in my case, I don't see a really influence my artwork in this kind of topic. So yeah, I didn't have like a clear answer to this in this case.
If I can add something, speaking of, you know, speaking of how can I say, women artists and men artists were treated in the past. Specifically, actually, that's specifically about surrealism. So Sonia Dell'Aria, who was a very important artist, and of course she was also the wife of Dell'Aria, who I forgot the first name, but he was another very important male surrealist artist. I remember reading her diary a while ago, and there was this quote that I think is very relevant, you know, in relation to what we are saying now. She wrote something like, you know, men don't allow us to use male traditional, how can I say, important media, so, you know, paintings and sculpture, you know, what was deemed as official at the time. So we are talking about the 30s. But at the same time, men don't allow us to call what we do with textiles, with, you know, with other media that were not, you know, called fine art at the time. They, you know, basically she wrote, basically men don't want us to work as them, but at the same time, they don't want to call our art, if it makes any sense. So I suppose that if any of this makes sense for you, what I'm trying to say is that maybe one of the good things, but again, it's definitely something that may need to be reviewed. I suppose that digital art in general allows, you know, women artists and men artists to somehow play in the same field, if you know what I mean. I suppose it's way more difficult for, I suppose, but again, please say if it's not like that. I suppose that generally speaking, women artists and men artists somehow work, you know, with the same tools. It doesn't matter whether, you know, a work is made by a man, or I'm talking about, of course, a digital work. I mean, it doesn't, especially because, you know, on the internet, nobody knows if you are a dog. So what I'm trying to say is that it doesn't really matter, you know, what's your real identity. I mean, more often than not, I found in the last few years, many artists that weren't even real people. I mean, they were people, but, you know, they were like 3 or 4 different persons using the same name, if you know what I mean. And you know, there were, I don't know, women, men, teenagers, people in their 60s working all together under the same name. So I suppose that from that point of view, presumably, hopefully, there are way less difficulties for people that are not men in their 40s with a long white beard, I suppose. I suppose.
Yeah, it is. I think I definitely felt a few years ago, before there was a lot of online resources in terms of learning, when it comes to the sort of 3D industry, which is maybe not so much in the art world, it's more a kind of design side, that was very male dominated, and it still is. So I think it's important to just mention that. And I remember when I was first learning, I sort of it was really overwhelming, and trying to teach myself everything. And you know, the few guys I knew who did it, I felt were quite you know, I didn't want to ask them, because the way they responded was like, you know, you should know this stuff if you're an artist, if you're a 3D artist, you should know these things. And it's like, you know, I stopped asking for help, and I just sat and I literally just worked it out on myself. And I feel like I spent years of almost like wasting time, which is never wasted time when you sort of struggle with something. You always find these gems of like your own way of working. And you know, now there's like kind of collectives of people who are, you know, more like identified as women, or you know, other genders, and we've all kind of come together, and we're all kind of helping each other. But like a few years ago, it wasn't even, well, that wasn't even there. And I think it's just important to maybe say that as well. Is there's, even in these spaces where you would assume there was like equality and a level playing field, which I hope that is starting to be more the case now. But even just like a few years ago, I feel like that wasn't really the case. So I just feel like that was important to add in.
Point out. Absolutely.
I definitely agree that there's this new, like, the digital space allows a sort of leveling of, you know, you're not kind of stuck with.
No, I absolutely agree with you. Of course, there are many aspects that must be addressed when it comes to, you know, to equality, gender equality, but also, I would say, even classes equality. And again, as I said earlier, there are so many different ways to make a work that is supposed to be for everybody, you know, limited. So again, it's of course in terms of who makes art, but it's also in terms of how you can actually enjoy the art you make, if it makes any sense. Right, so it's 6:05 here in Italy. I suppose we are running out of time now. So, you know, I would like to thank, of course, Rachel, Irene, Annie, and Alex for the great discussion we had today. And of course, all of you, the public, for watching us from home. If you want to learn more about digital art and exhibitions, I suggest you to visit the website of Electric Artefacts and have a look at the works of Rachel and Irene. And of course, please, as always, please follow us on social media. Is there anything else you would like to say to our public before wrapping up?
Thanks everyone for hanging out with us tonight, and stay tuned for our next panel.
That's brilliant. So thank you again. See you soon. And ciao, ciao, I suppose.
Thank you.
Bye.